Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Depression Quest, a game that deals with living with depression in a very literal way. This is not meant to be fun or light-hearted experience. If you are currently suffering from the illness and are easily triggered, please be aware that this game uses stark depictions of people in very dark places. If you are suicidal, please stop playing this game and visit this link. The goal of this game is twofold. Firstly, we wish to illustrate as clearly as possible what depression is like, so that it may be better understood by people without depression. Hopefully this can be something to spread awareness and fight against the social stigma and misunderstandings that depression sufferers face. Secondly, our hope is that presenting as real a simulation of depression as possible, other sufferers will come to know that they aren't alone and hopefully derive some measure of comfort from that. It goes without saying that because of the very nature of depression, it is experienced differently by every person who suffers from it. We aren't trying to say that this is the best or most accurate representation, merely that this is an amalgamation of the experiences of the developers and several people close to them. Many of the following encounters deal with issues such as therapy, medication, handling a love life, and reaching out to support networks. In reality, less than half of depression sufferers actually seek treatment for reasons such as lack of money, perceived personal failing, or public stigma. These things were included in order to touch upon as broad a range as possible, since all of these elements can be very important to sufferers, though they likely will not be the experiences of most sufferers. It is important to recognize that not everyone with depression is so lucky. Many people with the illnesses do not have a lot of luxuries that we have in this game. We've written it in a way so that we can focus specifically on the illness, which becomes more and more difficult to deal with as the person who has less and less well off. For this reason, a proportion of proceeds from this game will be donated to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline to support depression treatments and educations. This game uses audio. Okay, and it's from Zoe, Patrick, and Isaac. So that pretty much sums up all of anything that I could have needed to say. It is early on Monday morning. You are a mid-20s human being. You have a significant other named Alex, who you are rather fond of, and that you have been seeing exclusively for the past few months. The rest of your social circle consists of a variety of friends and acquaintances, some of whom you met at your day job, which is a little boring, but it does pay the rent. You would like to be doing more with your life, as would your parents, but you're still in the process of figuring out what that means and how to go about it. Oh, I see, so you can use the links to expand upon certain points. You met Alex through a mutual friend a few months ago. The two of you hit it off pretty well after that night, and after a series of initially awkward dates, you became a couple, much to your surprise and excitement. Alex is 3 months younger than you are, and currently a student with a part-time job and a broad social circle. She's also got a wide variety of interests, and oftentimes you worry that you might be a bit too boring for her, but she's been good at trying to reassure you that she's happy with you. Your relationship consists of a lot of nights of watching Netflix when you've both got time off work and she doesn't have classes, with the occasional social outing that she tends to have to talk you into attending. She tries to be understanding when you're in one of your moods, as she puts it, though you are starting to feel like she doesn't really understand what it's like for you, and this sense of tension in your relationship. Coupled with your reluctance to want to go to college parties, this feeds your worry of not being exciting enough for them. Your social circle is made up of a few close friends, some of whom you've known since high school and from jobs you've worked. You've also made various acquaintances through reluctantly going to social events with Alex. You keep in touch with a few friends of friends that you occasionally run into. You had several online friends that you talk to regularly, and you feel less guarded with, possibly due to communicating with the safety of being behind a keyboard. You enjoy the low commitment of the friendship, since they don't expect very much of you other than to listen and share personal thoughts and experiences. Despite the low commitment, you feel fairly well connected with these people and tend to be more honest with the people you interact with in real life on a day-to-day basis. You feel incredibly nervous trying to make a new friend on your own. You're very good at talking yourself out of going to unfamiliar places or larger social engagements, regardless of how much you may actually wish to attend. Meeting new people stresses you out to a high degree, and this is something you wish you could work past. You admit that you have a bad habit of flaking on social engagements. Even with long-time friends, you are puzzled as to why some days you just can't force yourself to go and see people that you really do care about. Those that have stuck around long enough to be that close with you understand that this is a thing you sometimes do, and have seemed to be more or less accepted it, even though they charge you for it on occasions. However, you've had friends in the past give up trying to maintain a friendship with you because of this trait, taking your social anxieties as a personal slight, or eventually getting tired of having to track you down all the time. You feel incredibly guilty about this, but you're not quite sure how to change it. You have a day job in which you feel is really nothing special. You started out receiving minimum wage and have stayed around long enough to be making enough to support yourself. The work is dull and unrewarding, and most days you feel like just about anyone can do it. You have a hard time relating to most of your co-workers, so mostly keep to yourself and get the day's work done while you're there. There are one or two people you chat with, though. You wouldn't consider yourself to be close to them. A lot of days lately you've had a really hard time getting out of bed and forcing yourself to go in. You're starting to wonder for just how much longer you can keep this up. You'd really like to find another job in your field of interest, but it feels like you're underqualified every time you look at online job postings. Sometimes you think about going back to school, but you would be unsure how you would be able to support yourself and wonder if the degree would really help anyway. You're one of the few people you know whose parents never got divorced, but you do wonder if they still love each other sometimes. You have an older brother named Malcolm who has moved across the country with his wife to work a higher paying job. Every major holiday that you see him at, you feel a bit jealous, like the lesser kid. Despite being genuinely happy to see him, you feel very ashamed of these feelings. Your parents genuinely care for you. This often involves inviting you back to your childhood home for dinner, although your mother thinks you never visit quite regularly enough. You get the impression they don't fully understand you. They want to see you succeed, and don't know why you haven't gotten further in life yet because you're so smart and talented. Anytime you've tried to talk to them about your motivation issues, they tell you that the solution is simple: to work harder or want it more. Your father is generally more forgiving of your lack of a career path, while your mother seems to think you're too smart to be in the position you are. You know they love you and they're not bad people, you just feel like a big disappointment sometimes. You're also dealing with motivational issues that sometimes makes dealing with these things difficult. You feel that this is probably your fault, and on bad days you can feel inwardly angry and down on yourself for being lazy, but you're not quite sure how you can break out of it, or how other people deal with these feelings or seem so very functional. You spend a lot of nights fixating on things about this, but never seem to do anything about it other than lose sleep. It's an unreasonably warm Wednesday evening. You spent the past several hours at work. The past week or so you found your job motivation flagging even more than usual. You've been in a fog practically all day today, simply going through the motions without even realizing what you've been doing half the time, and yet time seems to be moving at half speed. You're so checked out that when your boss approaches you to tell you that it's dead and you can go home early, it barely registers. As you walk home, the streets hiss from the recent rainfall, and you know that your significant other will be in classes until late, another couple of hours at least. You briefly consider using this serendipitous solitude to catch up on that project you've been working on haphazardly for the past few months. A while back, you and some of your older friends were at a bar catching up. After liquefying considerably more of your paycheck than was perhaps reasonable and ending up thoroughly in your cups, you open up to the only people you really consider yourself close to and end up launching into a drunken triad about the meaninglessness of your utterly menial job and ultimately your own existence. However, never having really seen you in this state before, your friends were briefly taken aback by your sudden and characteristic outburst. One of your friends suggested that you get involved in a hobby on a more regular long-term basis, suggesting that spending your energy on something you care about might help you better cope with the awfulness of your 9 to 5. Although you were embarrassed that you would let your guard down, you felt self-conscious at seeming to have single-handedly brought the mood down at the table. You convinced yourself on the cab ride home that maybe it would be worth trying out. You began your project some months ago and have miraculously managed to keep at it, although your level of motivation and subsequent effort rises and falls considerably. While you were surprised when you started at how good it felt to actually work on something you were passionate about, lately you found it harder to muster the energy to really care about even this. As soon as you think about the work that awaits you at home, you can feel the panic creeping in from the back of your brain, unbidden. All you can think about is how incredibly far behind you are, and the amount of work seems nothing less than insurmountable. By the time you arrive at home and change out of your uncomfortable work clothes, the stress is weighing you down like a heavy, wet woolen blanket. Your computer seems to be staring you down from your desk. You want to sit down and work, but the mere thought of trying to work sends your stress levels flying even higher. More than anything, you feel suddenly and absolutely exhausted. You feel a strong sense to simply hide under the bed. I see. Do you reluctantly sit down at your desk and try to make yourself do something? Turn on the TV, telling yourself you just need a quick half hour to unwind from the work, or crawl into bed and you're so stressed and overwhelmed you couldn't possibly accomplish anything anyway. You are depressed, interaction is exhausting, and you are becoming more and more withdrawn. You are not currently seeing a therapist, and you are not currently taking any medication. You make a stop at the fridge and turn your favourite playlist on and sit down to start working. You open the last file that you were working on, and as soon as your hands touch the keyboard, your mind goes blank. All of the motivation and ideas you had when you arrived home suddenly vanish in a flash. Your brain seizes up and you find yourself physically incapable of any sort of productive thought. You take a break to loosen up, popping into your email box, Twitter, and various other internet-based distraction folders. Frustratingly, this pattern continues throughout the course of the evening. As soon as you try and focus on work, your brain diverts all of its energy away from the task at hand, while you keep flipping back to your work. You find the sheer mental effort involved in keeping your brain focused is overwhelming and tiring. A few Twitter arguments, YouTube videos, and sparse amounts of actual work later, your playlist flips back to track 1 and the ice in your glass has melted, diluting the last dregs of coke you were nursing. You look at the clock and realise that a few hours have passed since you sat down to work and you've made a negligible amount of progress. I can just wake up early tomorrow and catch up, you think to yourself as you climb into bed, even though you know that never really happens. You are very depressed, you spend a large amount of time sleeping, hating yourself and having very little energy or motivation. It's a mild Friday afternoon. Alex calls you from one of her classes, telling you that there's going to be a really awesome birthday party tonight at her apartment that one of her roommates is throwing. You've hung out with this roommate a few times with Alex and you're getting along well enough, but still aren't particularly close. You don't have work in the morning and nothing else in particular to do tonight. You feel kind of run down, but you have been fatigued most of the time anyway. You mention that you're feeling ill because you're not quite sure how else to explain these feelings to someone else and say that you aren't sure you can make it tonight. There's a second of silence over your phone, but you can swear that you can hear the sound of your partner's face fall. She tries to convince you anyway. You haven't seen her this week and she sounds pretty insistent that you come over. She even drops a few suggestively worded hints that you can stay over with them tonight after the party. What do? Agree to go, or say that you're just not feeling well and really can't make it? You agree to go, even though you're not feeling very social. You know it's important to Alex and you really would like to see her. Seeing her does make you feel better sometimes, and you hope that this is the case tonight, even if it does mean dealing with all the usual social anxiety. The time to leave rolls around and you grab your overnight bag. Alex's apartment is a short walk away and there are already people hanging out on the porch. You feel your chest tighten as you approach the building and try to steel your nerves. You quickly find your partner chatting away with the birthday girl, and Alex immediately lightens up when she sees you. "I'm so happy you came. I wasn't sure if you were going to make it." A young man taps her on the shoulder and she turns back to you to apologise and let you know that they have to do something with the party. Alex hands you a beer and plants a kiss on your cheek before going off to deal with whatever has come up. You look around but don't see anyone else that you recognise. Awkwardly stand in the same spot and unsure of what else to do. Put your bag in Alex's room and avoid the crowd in there for a while. Cling to the back wall, sip your beer and wait for your girlfriend to return, or proceed to drink in earnest, hoping it will make you less uncomfortable. After Alex walks away, you're not quite sure what to do with yourself. Scanning the party for familiar faces yields nothing, and you're not quite sure where your girlfriend or the birthday girl have got off to. You look at your beer in your hand and you know you care a lot less about everything else in general when tipsy, and you should avoid getting drunk and possibly emotional. You quickly down the beer, hoping it'll loosen you up a little. You down a few more as quickly as your stomach will let you handle the carbonization comfortably and wait for it to take effect. By the time it does, Alex has already returned and is introducing you to people. However, all of that drinking accomplished was making you even more tired and unfocused. You stick to your girlfriend for the rest of the night, staying fairly quiet in the group conversations. Later that night, as the two of you are both tipsy and dozing off, Alex cuddles up to you and lightly slurs, "I'm really glad you turned up tonight. To be honest, I didn't think you'd show, and it's really cool that you did." You know she meant it lovingly, but you're not quite sure how to feel about the statement. It's a little afternoon on a muggy Saturday. Your mother has come over for a surprise visit, claiming loudly that she doesn't see you enough, so she decided to invite herself over. As you converse, she walks around your place and you get the distinct impression you're being inspected. "So what's going on with you lately?" she asks abruptly. Taken somewhat aback by this left fielder, you tell her that you're not sure what she means. She repeats the question, saying that you haven't seemed a lot like yourself lately. She gestures to the dirty dishes piled in the sink and notes the fact that you haven't called or visited in a while. Your reticence only seems to spur her on more, and she presses you, asking if you're having problems at work or with Alex. And you're beginning to feel increasingly battered by her sudden, well-meaning but overwhelming inquisition. Under her questions, you become increasingly uncomfortable. You want to be able to explain to her how you've been feeling, but the truth is you're not really sure yourself. Nothing horrific has happened with work or with your significant other, or friends, or anything like that, but all the same, you can't deny that lately you've felt just drained and felt as if you're not really here. You wish you could tell your mother these things, but she hasn't been approachable about negative emotions in the past. She's the kind of person who holds the opinion that the solution to any problem is simply to try harder and maintain a positive attitude, a stance that has reared its head in past conversations when you've begun to explore the subject with her. You know she's unlikely to be understanding, and you feel the energy drain out of you when you imagine what would happen if you managed to blurt out everything you're feeling. What do? Try to be honest with her anyway? Tell her that everything is fine and thank her for asking, or change the subject? You attempt to tell your mother how you've been feeling, despite initial misgivings that you had about doing so. Finding the right words for how you've been feeling feels like trying to untangle Christmas lights, searching for the dead bulb in the cluttered mess. She watches you intently and audibly sighs before you can clearly articulate anything. Unfortunately, she reacts predictably. An attitude like that won't get you anywhere. You need to work harder at getting what you want instead of sitting around feeling sad about it. Nothing good will happen unless you make it happen. She isn't angry or spiteful as she tells you this. You try to explain that it's not a matter of that, but you can tell that's not going to get you anywhere. The frustration chokes the words in your throat and you give up on trying to push the subject any further. You know she's giving you the advice that makes sense to her and genuinely wants the best for you. However, she doesn't understand that it's not as simple as somehow deciding to be positive or work harder. It's that those things aren't viable options because of these feelings. You accept your defeat and the conversation drifts onto another subject. She leaves after chiding you to call her more often and take better care of yourself. You sigh heavily as you close the door behind her and spend the next few hours laying in bed staring at the ceiling. It's a lazy Sunday morning. You are idly clicking around online as your phone rings. Sam, a co-worker of yours that you've been friendly with, asks how you are and makes hurried small talk with you. You typically only enter talk with him on the phone when you see one of your shifts needs to be covered, so it's slightly awkward. You're waiting in anticipation for him to ask you to come in on short notice when he veers the conversation in a completely different direction. "How do you feel about cats?" he asks. "Mine had kittens a few weeks ago and I'm having an awfully hard time finding the last one with a litter. You don't have any pets, right?" It takes you a moment to process this new information, and you're caught off guard as he begins earnestly trying to sell you on the idea of taking the last kitten off his hands. It's not something that you had specifically considered before, and he seems fairly insistent. She's a real sweetheart and really loves people, and she's already got all of her shots taken care of, and the vet said she's as healthy as a horse. I can bring her over by your place tonight if you're interested. You look around your apartment and try to picture a cat in it as he continues to tell you how cute she is. You tell him that this is all rather sudden, and that you don't have anything for a kitten set up here. Oh, don't worry about it, we can bring over a litter box and food and all that, since you'd really be helping me out of a fix. It's the least I can do, I just don't want to have to put you in a shelter. You can't help but feel like you're being guilt-tripped, but you decide to give it some serious consideration. It does get awfully lonely around your apartment, and it might feel a little less empty with a cat around. However, since you've been feeling down, it might not be a good idea to take on the responsibility of a cat, even if they are fairly low maintenance. You become a cat owner, and you could use the companionship. Decline, you're not in a good place to be taking on even more responsibility, or decline because you don't like them. You accept the offer of the kitten and hang up shortly after making arrangements for your co-worker to drop her off tonight. After hanging up, you worry that if you've taken on this sudden responsibility that you can't handle, and hope you don't make a small animal suffer for it. You're not entirely sure what to expect and spend the rest of the afternoon researching cat care online and trying to think of a name. The evening rolls around and you hear a knock at your door, startling you out of reading the Wikipedia entry entirely too hard. You take possession of a small, terrified, black and white kitten in a carrier, along with everything you need to start taking care of her. You take her into your bedroom, close the door, and open the door to the carrier excitedly. She cowers in the back of it and you back off, feeling slightly defeated. You remember what you researched on introducing a kitten to a new home and leave for a while to go mess around on your computer, hopefully checking over your shoulder every so often to see if she has come out yet. She hides inside her carrier periodically, making sorrowful cat howls long enough for you to start worrying that she really doesn't like you. By the time you go to bed, she's curled up at the foot of it, eyeing you nervously before falling asleep. Over the next few days, you gain her trust and she begins to affectionately follow you around, sleeping on top of you and hopping up on you anytime you sit down to do some work. It's late Friday afternoon and quitting time is just around the corner. A bright clear day is giving way to a still, temperate evening, and you can hear your co-workers all around you anxiously making plans for their evenings and weekends. But what you're really looking forward to is getting home and resting after what's turned out to be a very long and taxing work week. Just before the end of your shift, you get a call from Alex. It seems a group of your mutual friends are heading out to a nearby pub for dinner and drinks to celebrate the end of the week. They want to know if you'd like to come along. You tentatively tell her that you're emotionally exhausted from a work week and a social outing like that might take a bit too much out of you today. You encourage her to go and have a good time though, since you know it's been a while since she's gone out with her friends, and the effort feels futile since you know she isn't going to go without you. A couple of hours later, the two of you find yourselves in a familiar position, on the couch watching a comedy show on Netflix, a box of pizza open on the coffee table in front of you. You look across the couch at her and start to feel anxious. You feel bad about effectively forcing the two of you to stay in tonight again. While you're always appreciative of your partner's efforts to take your feelings into account and make sure you're socially comfortable, you sincerely worry they are not holding her back from enjoying a more fulfilling relationship. While she does seem to enjoy spending time with you as the two of you sit in comfortably, almost contented silence watching old shows you've seen 2 or 3 times before, your ever-increasing fear that your relationship is becoming one-sided weighs more and more heavily on you. You feel more than ever like a burden or a ward to her, and it's virtually impossible for you to see what value you could possibly offer to her in return. Worst of all, this nagging fear has made you feel more self-conscious than ever, withdrawing further inwards, and you've started to pull away from everyone, even Alex herself. What do you do? Ask her if she's happy with the relationship, or don't say anything as you're already worried about her being upset with you. You look over at Alex, who hadn't noticed you watching her yet, and you try to pass the expression on her face. You worry that it's one of sheer boredom and bare tolerance. You wonder if she's thinking about all the fun she could be doing tonight if she wasn't trapped on this couch with you, ordering from one of the same 3 takeout places that you always order from. A sense of disappointing her creeps over you as you picture what the night could have been if you had just accepted the invitation and had made earlier. I know this is a pretty boring Friday night for you. Are you really happy being with me? Being like this? She turns to look at you, forehead wrinkled. Why do you ask me that so often? You feel her body stiffen and pull away from you, just a little. Well, I mean, you start, but are unable to try and think of how to answer. I know it's not what you'd usually be up to. I don't know, I guess I'm just worried you're getting bored sometimes, or never mind. I know it's not usually what you'd be up to. Alex frowns. What do you mean by that? I just mean that you usually like going out and doing things, partying and stuff, you know. She sighs and falls against the couch. It's not like I want to do those things all the time. I like nights in too, just like everyone else. She turns to you, frustration wearing on her face. Sometimes I swear it feels like you don't know me at all. It's not that, Your voice trails off and you notice that she has an exasperated expression on her face that you have seen once or twice when you're having conversations like this in the past. Conversations where you're poorly expressing your own self-doubt and insecurities, seeking reassurance but rather feeling like you're making things even worse. She sighs again, this time louder, turning towards the flickering screen. I like spending time with you, okay? If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. The annoyed tone in her voice makes you think otherwise, but you take it as a sign that you should probably drop it for now, and you feel bad for upsetting things. You are deeply depressed, even activities you used to enjoy hold little or no interest for you, and you exist in a near constant state of lethargy. It's a breezy Sunday afternoon. You've allowed Amanda, an old friend from school that is in town for the weekend, to talk you into leaving the house for a coffee to catch up. You meet her in a small cafe and talk about what you've been up to since you've last seen each other. And you can't help but feel like they are a lot more accomplished and interesting than you are while listening to them talk about their lives since school. When it's your turn to brief them on your activities, you feel anxious and ashamed and give a very abbreviated version. You try to talk about your job as little as possible and you feel incredibly boring when you describe it, despite her expressing this most sincere interest in your life and you. Amanda has known you long enough to read your mood and your tone of voice. She leans in to ask a question, gently touching your hand, a look of genuine concern on her face. What's wrong? Do you insist that nothing is wrong and change the subject? Defensively ask what she means by that, or notice that your hands are shaking. It's such a small question, but it feels like a blow to the gut. You surprise yourself when you realise that your tightly clenched fists are now beginning to shake slightly. Despite your best effort, you feel tears begin to sting your eye. You try to disguise this by tilting your head up and praying that they'll get sucked back in. She suggests that the two of you get out of there and you feel mortified. She offers to go back to your apartment with you, but the two of you end up talking in her car for nearly 2 hours as the words just pour forth from you. Amanda seems unsure of what to say at times, but she listens and rubs your back as you sob and talk. She asks if you've gone to a doctor about this, and you admit that you haven't. She mentions that her mother is seeing a very good therapist in town and offers to ask her about it. You're not thrilled of the idea of going to a therapist, and even less thrilled of the idea of Amanda telling somebody else about your problems, but she persists and tells you that she'll email you the doctor's contact information later in the week. It's a glaringly sunny Monday, one of the few days that your brother Malcolm is in town and free long enough for you two to actually see each other. You have a dental appointment that day, but you make plans for him to pick you up afterwards. Your appointment takes a little longer than expected because your dentist tells you that you've been starting to grind your teeth in your sleep to a worrying degree. Given how nearly everything in your life has been feeling enormous and stressful lately, this doesn't come as much as a surprise to you. He suggests that you try to reduce your stress level and fits you in for a night guard. It feels awkward and too big for your mouth, but you feel embarrassed looking at your puffed face in the mirror at it. You finish up the appointment in a hurry and leave about half an hour overdue for meeting your always punctual brother in the parking lot. You finish up as quickly as possible and leave the building to scan the parking lot for your brother's car. You don't see his old Civic somewhere. You pass by a blue Camaro and jump as it beeps at you, causing you to jump in surprise. It takes you a moment for you to realise, but it's Malcolm in the driver's seat. You hop in the passenger seat and compliment him on his new ride, and he mentions it's the perk of a promotion he's recently obtained at work. He starts telling you about how much more money he's making and how his career was really taking off and how he's starting to look at houses with his wife soon. You clutch the bag containing the nightgown in your hand and feel yourself clench your teeth as you think of your crummy apartment and how long it's been since you've been able to take a day off work without having to worry about making ends meet. He's only 2 years older than you, but you feel he's eons ahead of you in every other respect of your life. So, he asks, how did your appointment go? Did you get drilled full of holes or what? Tell him it was a routine cleaning, or tell him about your teeth grinding problem but not the stress causing it. The dentist said I'm apparently grinding my teeth too much when I sleep. Oh, been stressed out lately, kiddo? Deciding that you don't really want to go into it, you tell him that you don't think that's the case and it's probably just a random thing. He doesn't pry further and instead begins reminiscing with you about the time you chipped a baby tooth because he accidentally knocked you over once. You go out for dinner and catch up on things, but you still feel somewhat distracted by the gnawing anxiety in the back of your mind. Though you enjoy your brother's company, you still feel like you want nothing more than to go home and hide from the world tonight. It becomes hard for you to try and suffer through all of the horrible feelings down and go emotionless when someone like the dentist can see a fraction of what's going on inside your head. It leaves you feeling embarrassed and weak, and you hate yourself for feeling that way. You wonder if you're really fooling anyone into thinking you're a normal person, and then wonder if your brother knows and is hanging out with you out of pity. After he drops you off at your apartment, you throw the night guard out. You can't even stand to look at the thing. It's a dry Sunday morning. You grab your morning coffee and scoot your rapidly growing kitten off your office chair, despite her protest, and sit down at your work to check your emails. A new message pops up in your inbox almost as soon as you do. It's from Amanda, and you remember meeting her in the cafe and awkwardly bringing up your feelings to her. Hey buddy. Hey, sorry, I know it's been a few weeks. I meant to get this to you sooner, but it took a while for me to get hold of my folks back home, and Dad told me to say hi by the way. Anyway, I remembered what we talked about last time I saw you, and I hope you aren't insulted. But I asked Mum for the number of her therapist, and don't worry, I didn't tell her who it was for. I think she's worried about me though now, ha. Anyway, this is the number, and it's a really good office. You should look into it. Talking to somebody can't hurt. And if you're worried about money, don't be. This is one of the few that has a really good sliding scale free system and won't charge you what you can't afford. I hope you're feeling better, and it was really nice to see you again. You're still early enough that you could call and make an appointment today, and your kitten curls up in your lap as you consider what to do. Sleep on it and see how you're feeling in the morning. You're not keen on the idea at all, but you don't want to disappoint Amanda, or close the email without thinking more of it. This has been an embarrassing enough experience as it already is. The thought of picking up the phone and calling somebody about this right now is overwhelming. Surely you're having a hard time lately and motivation issues, but you're in really need of therapy. Shouldn't you just get over it yourself? What if they put you on medication that makes you feel like a zombie? What if you go and the therapist looks down on you? What will Alex think about all this? Trying to think about all these things at once makes it feel like a very big deal, and you decide to take your time to think on it. The rest of the day passes quickly, and that night you have a hard time falling asleep because your brain is too busy thinking about all of these other things and imagining all the ways it could go horribly wrong. The next morning you check your emails again with blurry eyes and a mewing kitten. Amanda's email is still there, seemingly waiting for you, and you are no more decided than you were yesterday. Call after wrestling with it for a few minutes longer, or don't call. There is way too much for you to be able to deal with right now. You read through Amanda's email 2 or 3 times, and then sit and stare at your computer for a while. While the memory of that uncomfortable conversation makes you feel newly embarrassed and self-conscious, part of you is also encouraged by the fact that she cared enough to get back to you at all. Sitting in front of your computer, you start to question things like whether or not Amanda sent you this number out of pity, or perhaps some sense of obligation after having listened to you. Your question motivates... You question her motives and the validation of her concern, and whether or not you think seeing a therapist would even be helpful. Yet, almost unconsciously, you reach for your phone, and before you realise what's happening, you're listening to the therapist's line ring. Before you can bring yourself to hang up, you're listening to a slightly cynical but not unpleasant voice of the receptionist asking how she can help you. I'd like to make an appointment with the doctor, you manage to stammer out. The conversation is quick and not really unpleasant as you were fearing, and quicker than you can say Freudian slip, you've scheduled an appointment. And quicker than you can say, appointment day rolls around. Do you head to the therapist's office, even though you're totally unsure of what to expect? Sit in your car terrified and try to talk yourself into or out of going? Just the thought of going to your appointment ties your stomach in knots and you crawl back into bed. You have your first session with a new therapist, Dr. Susan Melville, a tall woman in her mid-40s with a disarming demeanour and patient eyes with the start of the slightest smile lines. She makes you feel comfortable fairly easily, in which a pleasant surprise after all of your anxiety over the appointment. As you leave, you make a second appointment. You're still sceptical about all of this, but you figure you may as well see where this goes. The hardest part, it seems, was taking the first step. You're still not sure if and how you're going to tell your family or your partner, but you figured you'd deal with that when the time comes. Either way, you feel relieved that you managed to see this through instead of being paralysed with worry over it. Even if nothing comes of it, you did something you said you would instead of flaking out or running away again. You're emotionally exhausted when you get home and collapse into bed. You sleep better that night than you have in a week, and you're not sure if it's because you were so tired when you got home or it's because of the therapist. You spend some time on a therapist's couch and you're having difficulty finding the motivation to continue going to your sessions. It is early on a Wednesday morning. Lately you've developed a nasty habit of waking up 10 or 20 minutes before your alarm rings. Unfortunately, that day is no exception. You lay in bed, each minute ticking closer and closer to wake-up time, passing on a swelling wave of ever-encroaching dread. Sooner than you would like, your alarm blares with caustic inevitability, and you frantically pound the snooze button and then retreat under your blankets, as if the warmth of your comforter can shield you from the passage of time. You almost always have difficulty rising from bed, but today that simple task seems to be nothing short of Herculean. After several snooze cycles, you decide that you just can't deal with work today. You're incapable of even rousing yourself from bed, let alone going into work and forcing yourself through another day. Not to mention you've snoozed so many times that it would be almost impossible to gather on time now. Head into work, at least you can leave early if it's too unbearable, or call your boss and tell him you're sick and won't be in today. In spite of the fact that your body is actively fighting you literally every step of the way, you somehow manage to drag yourself out of bed and make your way into work. Surprisingly, you end up only being about 5 minutes late, and no one seems to notice or care. Though when you woke up, the simple act of being physically present at your job seems like an impossibility, you are surprised at your own ability to push on through your day. While you are far from enjoying, or indeed even really coping with the dullness of your job today, you seem to have slipped into a trance-like state of automation, and time is nevertheless passing. Eventually, the end of the day rolls around and you head home, utterly exhausted, but at the same time, almost proud of yourself that you have stuck it out. You are depressed, interaction is exhausting, and you are becoming more and more withdrawn. You are seeing a therapist, even though you doubt anything she says could ever make you feel any better. It's 2 AM on a Sunday, and you have work in the morning. You roll over to see the sickly green glow of the time displayed on your LED alarm clock and let out an exasperated sigh. You've been trying to fall asleep for over 3 hours now, but to no avail. Every time your head hits the pillow, you're overcome with anxious thoughts that wrap themselves around each other. Worries about your job lead to worries about your future, lead to worries about your very identity, and you're unable to shake them off long enough to doze off. Your eyes won't even stay shut as your mind races through imagined scenarios going horribly wrong, which you promptly attribute to your general worthlessness. Your thoughts run too fast for you to come to a satisfying conclusion on any one of them. Your room is completely silent, but the silence has given way to a large static noise rattling around inside your head. Your heart beats loudly and you worry it's beating a little too fast. You worry that if you focus too strongly on your racing heart, you'll freak yourself out even harder and have a heart attack. You have to be awake for work in a mere 8 hours, and you know that your work is so much worse on only a few hours of sleep. Go to your computer. Sleep is clearly not happening no matter how long you lay here. You get out of bed and head to your desk. Laying in bed with nothing but your thoughts to keep you company makes you feel like you're going insane. The harshness of the light coming from the screen makes you squint a little as you turn it on, despite how often you find yourself in this exact situation. There have been so many nights lately just like this one. As you begin reading a news story, an online friend of yours, IMs you, instantly messages you. Attic, you're up late again, I see. Yes, I can't sleep. Again. Thinking too much again? You guessed it. I want to talk about it. You end up talking with Attic for quite some time about how you've been feeling. He's always been easy to talk to about personal matters, and the added security of being online helps. Being able to rethink what you say as you type it out and check it before you send it always helps you to gather your thoughts, and you find it less intimidating in a way to type it all into a prompt than say it out loud. I don't want to be the guy who thinks they can diagnose something because I read a Wikipedia article, but it does sound like you may have depression. You should talk to somebody about that, like a doctor. Pause. Are you really that transparent? Or is it because you've gotten used to talking about your feelings at this point? You're in someone who is making you a little paranoid, but you shake it off. We can do some research and see if there's any good doctors near you. It's not like you're going back to sleep anytime soon. Might as well do something while you're awake. No, that's okay, or actually I already have someone to talk to about it. Oh, okay, I'm glad you're taking that step. I've heard it's not an easy one. I know people kind of suck at understanding this sort of situation sometimes, but there's nothing wrong with having depression. You wouldn't be ashamed to have bronchitis or something, so there's no reason to be ashamed if your brain's sick instead. You spend a few more minutes talking with Attic about your therapy and your feelings about it. He's incredibly supportive, and you're happy to find that you have a confidant that understands your illness and is willing to lend you an ear when you're having a night like this. A little later you fall back into bed, kitten in tow, and find it easier to drift off to sleep. Even in sleep, you know you're still going to have nights like this sometimes, but it's good to know you have a friend who can sometimes help you through them. It's a chilly Thursday night, and you've just gotten off work. This has felt like one of the longest days you've felt in recent memories. Even though nothing exceptional had happened, a ton of minor things kept going wrong, and co-workers had tried your patience throughout the day. You considered leaving work early, but the last thing you wanted to do was deal with your insufferable boss on top of everything else. You're lost in thought on the commute home, and your feelings of frustration, both with your life and the world around you, build as you run into minor annoyances, like somebody bumping into you really hard as they walk by. By the time you get home, you're exhausted, and remember that these feelings were the ones you identified as negative feedback loop with your therapist. These pent-up feelings aren't dying down, and they are eating away at you. You open your front door and stare into your apartment. An overwhelming feeling of exhaustion overcomes you, and you feel like your energy levels are low enough that you'll likely settle into a single activity tonight. Do you reach out to somebody close to you, or don't burden anyone with your problems and instead distract yourself? Your head feels too noisy, and you need to trade it for some actual conversation. Your therapist did say that it was important to reach out to your support network, so it might as well give it a shot. Who do you call? Your mother? She unconditionally loves you, even if she doesn't always understand you. Alex, she's your girlfriend, or Malcolm, he's family and fun to talk to. You dial Alex, who picks up after only 2 rings. You ask if she has time to talk, and she tells you she's just hanging around in her PJs and is actually somewhat bored for once due to being caught up on her coursework. You try to figure out where to start with how you're feeling and are overcome with missing her face. You ask if she feels like grabbing some dinner, and you notice her barely contained surprise and delight on the other end of the line. You meet about half an hour later at an inexpensive diner not far from your apartment. While the food isn't great, you're surprised at how much your mood seems to have elevated just from being in her company. While at first you were extremely hesitant to talk about your job situation for fear of being burdensome or sounding like a whiner, you see that she's listening intently to you with what even to you seems like genuine concern. After winding down with a beer, you cautiously open up a little bit about your feelings surrounding your job and how drained it leaves you feeling. How you feel like you're simply existing, selling the days of your life for no real purpose. You surprise even yourself when you start talking about how frustrated and stymied you feel by your job, and how you used to feel passionately about things but feel like your energy and capacity for creativity is getting leached out of you each and every workday. You can't remember how long it's been since you've externalized this much raw emotion. The two of you spend several hours in the diner booth, long after your half-eaten food was cleared and the waitress stopped refilling your coffee cups. As soon as you get up to leave, a sudden wave of self-consciousness washes over you and you suddenly feel incredibly awkward. Then Alex stares up and grabs you tightly around the waist. You realise that short of boring her with your seemingly endless rants, she's simply happy to have gotten a chance to spend time with the real you. It's been, by all accounts, incredibly too long since you've allowed yourself to open up to them like this, and there's an almost palpable feeling of closeness you allow yourself to hold on to as you go to bed that night. It is an utterly nondescript Wednesday afternoon, the type of afternoon that would completely fade from memory unless one made an active effort to preserve it. As it has become routine on Wednesday, you sit on the couch of the doctor's office. To your mild surprise, she begins this session by breaking her characteristic therapist's silence and begins shaking it up right away. I wanted to say that I think it's great that you decided to come and see me. It's an incredibly important first step, she begins. I wanted to take some time today to talk about the possibility of supplementing or substituting your treatment with medication. The mention of medication makes your ears prick up and you feel your heart rate increasing as she continues. Many people find adding a pharmacological element to their treatment to be very helpful, and some even prefer to take drugs to completely eliminate their need to visit a therapist at all, providing you rely on your support network and are still reaching out to people. I, however, would prefer if we kept talking, should you choose to start the medication, so that I can monitor your progress and adjust as needed, but the choice is ultimately yours. I just want to run the option by you to gauge what your thoughts on the matter may be. She's given you a lot to think about. What do you do? Accept a prescription as a way to augment your therapy. Tell her that you'd like to try the drugs instead of therapy. These weekly sessions have always made you more than a little uncomfortable. The thought of messing with your brain chemicals makes you uneasy. You'll stick with the therapy, and this whole therapy thing has been overwhelming to you, and this is the final straw. You're done with both. You think the matter over long and hard. It's strange to think that recently none of this sort of thing was even on your radar, and yet here you are being asked to make a decision about it. You're both skeptical and nervous, still getting over the initial shock of even just talking to a therapist. Still, over the years you've done enough entry-level reading on the subject to know that if it doesn't help, at least it won't hurt, right? After an intense and protracted period of internal vacillation, you decide to bite the bullet and go for it. You tell the doctor that you'd like to try some medication in addition to your therapy, and you spend about half an hour going over what you'll be taking and what you should expect from it. Thinking back on the decision later, you're pretty sure you had your fists tightly clenched the whole way through. You have started taking the medicine. You are hoping that they will work, but you aren't optimistic and you are worried about the side effects. It's Wednesday evening and you are visiting at your parents' house for a holiday. It's one of the handful of times during the year when you drive out to visit your old hometown, and you've seen random people you had gone to school with around town. And whenever bumping into them, the usual short versions of what you've done since graduating are exchanged. You've gone through a few of these today and are very aware of how much you feel like you haven't accomplished anything. When you were in high school, you had much larger plans, and you feel like you failed to manifest most of them, even if you had managed to. You've largely lost interest in what you thought you wanted to do growing up. Now you're not even really sure what you do want to do, and you feel like you're lacking the ambition or drive to figure it out. Everyone you've caught up with seems so much happier than you, like they've got their lives all figured out, and you've kind of been feeling a bit like a failure in comparison. Your brother Malcolm arrives with his wife in tow shortly before you sit down to dinner. He's been travelling for his job lately, and you haven't seen him much since the day he picked you up from the dentist. Your parents haven't seen him much since then either. During dinner, they all catch up and Malcolm talks about the amazing things he's been up to on the road. Your mother turns to you and asks you what you've been up to since you last saw them. Oh, the same old story, you say. Nothing really new is going on. Your mother makes a strange face. Oh, nothing new? How long are you planning on staying at that job of yours? What do you say? Excuse yourself to the bathroom, admit that you don't know what to do, or lie and tell them what they want to hear, that you're actively looking for a more prestigious position. Actually, you start sheepishly, I'm not really sure about what I want to do right now. Your mother puts down her fork. So what? You're planning on living the way you do for the rest of your life? How will you afford a house on that paycheck? What about kids? Your father interrupts, slightly placing his hand over your mother's. It's okay, Linda, let the kids be what they are. There's nothing wrong with not knowing what you want to do in your 20s. I didn't get into construction until I was nearly 40. Your mother looks across from the table with you, unsatisfied with her husband's reasoning. I don't think it's normal for someone at your age to not have a path. You need to think hard about it or you'll never make anything out of yourself. You, mother, come on. Malcolm interjects. This emotionally exhausts you, and you want to tell her that you're thinking hard, and that not knowing what you're doing with yourself bothers you more than it ever could have bothered her, and that sometimes it feels like you're lost in the woods, and that if you were to drop dead in your apartment that the world wouldn't notice. You want to make her understand that more often than not you feel like an alien, like there isn't anywhere in this world that feels like a place where you belong. You have no idea how to fix it or what to do. You wish you could find the words so that she would understand that being looked down on like this kills you and drives home the feeling of being a total outsider. Instead, you get very quiet for the rest of the meal while your mind goes numb, and everything inside you feels exhausted. It's a rainy night. You are hurrying through the rain to Alex's apartment at her behest. Though your pace is quick, the rain is steadily soaking up the trouser legs as you traverse the town, and it's darkening your already poor mood. The call came while you were at home after a day of dealing with abnormally frustrating people. You spent the afternoon trying to unwind and get some work on your project done. Alex called and interrupted one of your try to make progress, get frustrated at not making progress, and have a harder time making progress due to frustration, and then repeat loops, and you haven't fully shaken off the feeling of being annoyed with yourself from it yet. You knock on her door, and the third knock, you hear her voice from further in the apartment to come on in. As you cross the threshold, dripping rainwater everywhere, you notice that the lights are turned down very low in the apartment. You squint to navigate it as you clutch to your damp umbrella, but end up hitting your shin on a side table, mumbling a quick expletive under your breath. You barely make out Alex emerging from the hallway, clad in what looks like a robe with the bare skin of her legs peering out from underneath. "Why don't you come in and warm up?" she asks in a designated, but slightly cheesy, sexy voice. After a beat of silence, she states more naturally, "My roommates are out of town this weekend, so I thought it might be nice to have a little fun while they were away." You appreciate her affection, but you're too wrapped up in your own negative feedback loops to be in the mood right now. Do you tell her that you're not in the mood, suggest you do something else instead, or try to unwind with her before getting physical? You look at her standing, barely lit, and notice there's a few candles scattered around the apartment. It occurs to you that she has tried to make this night special for the two of you, even though you have a tight knot of antisocial frustration in your stomach. Seeing how much she cares makes you want to try and melt it away so that you can show her how much you care that she's gone through all this trouble. However, you desperately need to shift gears first before that's even possible. You look amazing. Let's have a drink together, you suggest, hoping that this will give you the push you need to get into the mood. You go into the kitchen and pour the two of you drinks, trying to focus on letting go of your bad mood. You sit down on the couch next to her and she cuddles up to you instantly. "What should we toast to?" she asks as she takes her drink. You think for a moment, putting the cheesy to us option to bed to say what's on your mind, letting go of your bad day. To tonight. The two of you cheers, and you ask her about her day. The conversation turns flirtatious, and the two of you find yourselves in the bedroom shortly after. You find that you're having trouble getting into things physically with her, and remember that diminished arousal was a possible side effect of your medication, and you'd hoped that you were part of the population that wouldn't be affected by it, but it seems as if that's not the case. However, you're still able to enjoy the closeness with Alex and fall asleep together happily. It's an early winter evening, and even though it's not particularly late, the time of the year has lent the sky to almost prematurely darken the cast. Day after day, just like today, you trudge home from your job and increasingly come to hate. On this day, your job misery seems to have reached a critical mass, and not even shedding your rain-laden and uncomfortable work clothes helps you to unwind from your workday. You collapse onto your couch, blank and numb. While your work always seems to be just an unpleasant reality of existence, it was a position you sort of fell into unexpectedly, never intending to work there long term, and it's getting harder and harder to keep it up. While it's certainly not your dream job, you've always just sort of stuck it out of necessity before, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. Although you couldn't even begin to imagine what else you could do, you do find yourself face to face with a question you can't ignore. Is your complacency worth the price of this misery? What do you do? Turn on the TV and let your mind go blank, aimlessly look through classifieds from the job, or try to be at least productive and focusing your efforts on your project tonight. You boot up your computer and navigate to the local Craigslist. You sift through a myriad of legitimate postings, clear pyramid schemes, and the occasional miscategorized random personal ad. You look through the section that is in line with your current job and start feeling a bit of despair. Would things really be any different if you were simply doing the same thing anywhere else? You email your resume to a few of the postings after coming up with a cover letter that you could use for a variety of things. After you've exhausted the postings for the last few days, you head back to the main page. There's a section that's more in line with the project you've been doing, and it's a highly competitive, creative field that you don't feel remotely qualified for. Despite that, you click on the section, scrolling through the postings. You daydream about actually holding a position where you would get to do something more meaningful, despite feeling completely intimidated by the requirements. You find a listing you actually want to apply for. You spend an hour crafting a really personal cover letter, and really giving it all to your task, and nervously send off the email. You're rather convinced that you'll never hear back from any of these places, but the act of trying to change the situation instead of stewing on it actually feels quite freeing, and you find yourself trying to stifle the hopes that you end up getting a creative job, but still it manages to bubble up anyway. It's a little past 8 PM on a Tuesday night. You're at your computer, frustration looks peaked, rubbing your eyes and sighing heavily. You're working on a project from your job that has you stretched to wit's end, trying to meet a looming deadline, and as it lurks closer and closer, you're seriously doubting your ability to get it done. You're dragging your feet a little at work due to your complete lack of energy lately. In spite of wanting to do a good job, you find yourself unable to push past it and feel horribly useless for it. You slide your hands off your face to look at your screen as it beeps up you. Hey, are you there? I really need to talk to someone about things. You feel like you're getting nowhere with your current task and could probably use a break. However, you know that you have a history of getting distracted and then losing the motivation to pick something back up again afterwards. Do you tell him that you're busy, try to regain your focus and don't answer, or answer him? You're feeling like you've hit a brick wall with your task, so why not take a break and help out a friend? Hey, what's up? I'm glad you're there. I just found out that I got cheated on and I don't know what to do. That's awful. The two of you talk for a long time and you lend a shoulder to your friend. You give him space to rant, to cry, and most importantly to voice his inner turmoil. You give him your full attention and talk to him through the options that are there for him about what to do next. You keep him from doing something rash, and the two of you decide that it's best for him to sleep on it before doing anything else. Exhausted, he departs for bed and thanks you for being there to talk with him. You close the instant messaging window and feel horribly sorry for your friend, but happy that you were able to help a bit. It serves as a tangible reminder that you are capable of being useful to someone instead of solely being a mess that needs everyone else's help. You boot back up your work project and find you're suddenly able to get some solid progress done in that night. It's a sunny Saturday afternoon. You're deep in thought on the way home from therapy. However, you notice that this time you're not in the same negative feedback loops that you usually get trapped in when being this introspective. You realise that although you still have your bad days, your lows aren't quite as low as they used to be. Your antidepressant bottle rolls across your dashboard as you take a left turn. You've been on this medication for quite some time now after a period of trying a few different types. Although you still have minor side effects, they've overall become an unnoticed part of your life. You feel as though your life has generally changed for the better recently, and you begin to wonder if you need them anymore. You don't feel as much despair or hopelessness, and you hate yourself a lot less these times. Maybe it's time to stop taking these. I seem to not really need them anymore. Do you continue to take the medication or get off the medicines? You have the realization that you can't be sure if it's a general life change that's making you feel better or just a sign that the medication is working. You decide against discontinuing the medication. It's not really a lesson you'd like to learn the hard way, and the side effects of this particular kind are negligible. The next time you see the doctor, you tell her about this, and you tell her that it is a common train of thought for people who have begun using medicine to help them manage their depressive experiences, and that you've managed to dodge a bullet because it generally ends poorly. She asks if you want to talk to her first before making any decisions about your medication in the future. You are moderately depressed, and you find it hard to focus on anything because you get physically and mentally exhausted very quickly. You're in therapy with a good counsellor, and you're doing cognitive behavioural therapy techniques that are starting to help. And your medication is helping you keep the edge off and keep some of the darker, more negative feedback loops from being quite as prevalent. It's yet another sleepless Thursday night. You're at Alex's apartment, wide awake in bed as she's sleeping peacefully beside you. She fell asleep hours ago, and you've been laying here unable to shut your brain up long enough to fall asleep. You've added the feeling of insecurity about your relationship to the rest of the noise in your head keeping you up at night. It was a kind of tense night between the two of you. You arrived after a stressful day at work, she made dinner together, but you barely said a word. You were stuck in your own head, and you had a hard time really being present with her as your thoughts turned all of the ways in which you feel like you're deficient at being a good person and beating yourself up mentally for each one. She said that she could tell you were in one of your moods and said that she shouldn't push you, but missed talking to you as the two of you sat on the couch together. You wanted to tell her how much you love her, but you couldn't make the words come out right and ended up sounding defensive instead. As you lay there next to her now, you trace your fingers along her arm, just lightly enough not to wake her. You still haven't explained your depression to her, or how you've started seeing a therapist, or that you've been taking medication, and it's starting to feel more like a secret you're keeping instead of something she simply doesn't know about yet. It's becoming more and more apparent that it's impacting your relationship with her, and you feel guilty about this. However, you're also terrified that if she knows the extent of your problems, she might leave you. You're already worried that she's only with you because she doesn't realise how terrible of a person you are yet, and you're afraid that this would be the final thing to expose you. She stirs in her sleep and squints at you with one eye open. With the confusion that comes from waking up, she asks if you're awake, and then if everything's okay. Tell her about the situation, or tell her it's nothing and that she should go back to sleep. You feel like a jerk for accidentally waking her up, but you're afraid if you put this off any longer, you won't find the strength to tell her later. No, actually everything isn't okay. Can I tell you something important? Alex sits up, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. For the rest of the night, you lay side by side, holding hands as you tell her everything. You tell her how it's more than just feeling sad. Sometimes you feel trapped by your own mind. How sometimes you feel nothing at all, and that you can't shake it off. You tell her how you've started going to therapy, how you feel embarrassed about it, and how it's working out for you. She listens the entire time, occasionally asking a question about this, or how that works, and asking you to explain some things further. She squeezes your hand and tells you that she understands, but that she's a little sad you didn't tell her sooner. After laying silent for a moment, the weight of what you just did hits you. You desperately want to say something, you desperately want her to say something to tell you how she's feeling about all of this, but you're too afraid of what the answer may be. You start convincing yourself that now she knows everything, she's going to leave, and there's no way someone could deal with how you really are. So how can I help? What do you need me to do? She asks. You think for a second, and the answer comes up, fills you with despair. I honestly don't know. I wish I knew how to fix this, but I don't know that you can do anything. I just think it's something I have to live with. She looks at you with sad eyes before kissing you on the forehead. Then I'll live with it, with you. I don't know how you could possibly love me. She rolls over and wraps her arm around your neck, setting her eyes on top of yours. You don't need to, just know that I do. It's Friday night, and you're laying across your bed feeling pathetic. As you were leaving work tonight, a group of co-workers asked if you wanted to join them for drinks. Feeling antisocial and put on the spot, you declined. You have a habit of doing this. You're often so convinced that you are weird and terrible that any invitation to hang out will end in disappointment for those who invited you. You never feel like you know how to act in a group outing, and you feel like a total creep since it seems to come so naturally to everyone who isn't you. You feel yourself petrified of breaking some unknown social rule that you don't go out often enough. Now, however, you find yourself alone at home. Your brain has begun telling you how pathetic and how sad you are for being unable to just be a normal person and go out with other nice people. You can't figure out why you can't just go out, meet people, and enjoy yourself. At the same time, you're also feeling like no one would possibly want to hang out with you if they knew the real you, because you're dull and weird anyway. You try your typical strategy and boot up Netflix to distract yourself from these feelings, but frustration within yourself builds, and you realise that you have to do something else with your night. Anything else to take your mind off how awful and lonely you feel right now. Do you see if Attic is online, call Alex, drink, go somewhere alone, or play with the cat? You sit down on the computer and open your chat client. Attic is indeed online, and the two of you catch up briefly before you start passing links to news stories and weird YouTube videos back and forth. Eventually he asks if you would like to play a multiplayer game with you, and you start the download. Realising you haven't eaten yet, you tell him you'll be back in time for the download to finish after you've made yourself some dinner. Out in the kitchen, you notice the time on the microphone. Several hours more than you had expected had passed, and you've only just realised it. Although it's not going out to a bar with people, you feel like this has taken the edge off the loneliness that you were experiencing earlier. Even if he is an internet friend, sometimes when you're too down to be social, he's the perfect person to talk to. You connect with him on a meaningful level, and you found it easier to be yourself while talking to him than you do most face-to-face social interactions. When you're down, you find yourself using this as another reason to feel like a loser, as though you could only make friends if they didn't have to deal with you in person, but for now you're relieved to be around him. You finish making your sandwich and sit back down at the computer. Your download is finished, and Attic is waiting for you to start. It's a cold Saturday afternoon. You've just arrived at Alex's apartment. She's happy to finally see you after a week of absences due to your schedules not lining up, due to your work and her school. You hug her in the doorway. She breaks away sooner than normal and sits down on the couch as you take off your sneakers and lay them down in the usual place right next to hers. There's something I was hoping we could talk about, actually, she says. You instantly worry that you're being blindsided by a breakup conversation due to the sudden shift in tone, and she quickly smiles and puts you at ease as soon as she sees all of the colour leave your face. It's nothing bad, I promise. With that, she leads you over to the couch and sits you on the other end of it, facing you. So I hope this doesn't freak you out, and if you feel like things are going too fast, just tell me. She talks faster than usual and efficient. We seem to have a lot of weeks like this, and they really suck. I was thinking I'd ask, since things are so strong with us, what are your thoughts about moving in together? It takes a few seconds to sink in, and leaves you a bit shocked when it does. You were worried she wanted to spend less time with you, not more. Do you want to? You ask? Well, yeah, I do. I mean, we had to sort out the logistics and everything, but those are all things we can take care of. You start to walk through the steps of imagining the two of you living together. You love the thought of being able to wake up next to her every day and see her so often. However, the more you picture it, the more a few concerns become apparent. There are things she's insulated from, like the days you can't even get out of bed, the nights your medication keeps you from being able to sleep, all of those moments where you're stuck staring at a wall, completely out of energy and feeling nothing. How would she handle that? How quickly would she want to get away from it? So, she starts. What do you think? Do you tell her that you want to, but you have some concerns, and discuss them honestly? Tell her that you don't think it's a good time for you right now, or decide to move in regardless of your worries. You are definitely still depressed, but things are getting better. Whatever you're doing seems to be working, and you really like that you're taking steps to effect positive change in your life. You now seem to enjoy going to see your therapist. Between giving you a chance to talk things out and the CBT techniques she shares with you, you find your sessions extremely helpful. You've been taking your medication regularly, and while you were skeptical at first, it's hard to argue with the fact that you've been feeling better than you have in a long time. You're really worried that if Alex were to live with you, she wouldn't be able to deal with your days of being unable to get out of bed, or nights where you can do nothing but stare at the wall and panic. Even though you've discussed your situation with her, you still feel that she doesn't realise the real depths of how bad it goes. It's the one thing for you to detail how you feel sometimes, and for her to see it pop up occasionally. It's entirely different for that situation to be something she has to live with alongside you. Well, I'd like to, but I think it's best if we talk about it a bit before committing to a decision. Though she seems a little defeated, you make it clear that you're not making excuses and actually mean that you want to talk. You reiterate a lot of what you've told Alex that night. Although she gets a little defensive and tells you that she knows all of that already, she confirms that she is willing to help you sort through those issues. I feel like you forget I love you sometimes. I know that there will be bad days, and I'd rather try to work through them. We can figure all of this out together. Her words sway you, and you can't help but hold her close to you. It's December, and you've returned to your parents' house to celebrate the holidays with your family. Out of the living room window, you can see a gentle flurry of snow drifting down to meet the pristine blanket of white from yesterday's unexpected Christmas Eve snowfall, and you quietly laugh to yourself at how incredibly cliché it all really does seem. Still, as you sit down to dinner, you can't help but notice how being surrounded by family in the overly kitsy atmosphere and your mother's decorations have created have actually helped you feel more relaxed and almost comfortable. Your mother is running around frantically, checking the oven and stockings and generally trying to family time it up, while your dad sits at the head of the table drinking a beer and laughing with your brother Malcolm. His wife Karen is there too, whom you've always gotten along with, and your parents even agreed to let you bring your kitten along, and she's been darting in and out of people's legs and hopping into laps at night. As you thoughtfully munch away at your turkey, listening to the conversations around you, your thoughts drift back over the last couple of months. You think about how hard things had gotten. You're playing over in your head some of the worst as well as some of the best memories. It seems like all of the things just come to a head over the past few months. The sudden flurry of relationship turmoil and professional anxiety, social stress, and above all the omnipresent sense of weight that it seems you have just recently become aware of. You're drawn out of your riviere by your dad's familiar booming laugh as some cheesy comment Malcolm made seems to have hit its mark. Sitting at that table, you're suddenly immensely glad for the chance to be able to ignore everything for an evening and not have to struggle trying to explain yourself for once. Fortunately, everyone seems to be content with laughing at each other's jokes and discussing favourite sports teams, and for a while you think you'll be able to get through dinner without any embarrassing personal intrusions. But no sooner did the thought cross your mind than the table conversations trickle off, leaving a slightly awkward silence to descend upon dinner. "So how are you doing these days?" your mother asks you poignantly. It's such a simple question, and one that you seem to have answered countless times recently, and you take a moment to collect your thoughts, then looking up, you take a deep breath. Well, you never really thought of yourself as a fighter, and even to say it now sounds kind of hokey. But looking back at the past few months to where you are now, it really does feel like you've endured an immense struggle. And look at where you are now with the sense of something that isn't quite pride. You still hate your job and find it unpleasant, but you're surprised to find that going into work each day is no longer a monumental challenge. You've started adopting some clever techniques, like taking short 2-minute breaks every hour to break up the monotony. And you now view your job as just 8 short hours of your day, a compartmentalization technique the doctor told you about that you've actually found works quite well. You know this job isn't what you wanted to do for the rest of your life, and you've actually started looking for other positions, even attempting a couple of preliminary interviews. You've started making efforts to go out with your friends more, and while the social scene still makes you very uncomfortable sometimes, you're more and more able to let yourself just enjoy the company of your friends. In fact, your relationship with many of them has increased over the past little while. You still definitely have days where you flake out or don't feel like hanging out, but for the most part your friends are understanding and appreciate your communication. By far the biggest change you've noticed in your life has been your relationship with Alex. You were terrified of talking to her about everything at first, but looking back you feel like it's only strengthened your relationship. She was always supportive of you emotionally, but lately the two of you have been even more in sync, and it's really starting to feel like you're building a life together. It even seems like the two of you have been making a more concerted effort to sync up your schedules, and have been spending more and more of your downtime with each other. Pretty soon you think moving in together may be a real possibility. The doctor commented on how well you seem to be doing, and whether a result of the therapy, the medication, or both, you can't help but agree. With all that seems to have improved recently, it's sometimes difficult for you to think about the fact that you still have bad days, sometimes even really bad days that serve as a stark reminder of the fact that this will be something you have to deal with for the rest of your life. Depression is a battle, and though you're clearly ahead in the fight, you know that the battle isn't ever going to be completely over. Sometimes even addicts can tell when things are rough, despite your best effort to the contrary. While you know that depression can never be cured, you have a strong support network with your friends and even Malcolm, and armed with newfound confidence in your friends and family, you accept that though the road may be rocky, it is at least not solitary. You meet your mother's gaze from across the table and muster up a smile. "I'm good," you tell her. She says nothing, but you can feel her smile from across the room. We would like to take you... Seriously, old man, this is the last page. The story's over now. Can you please, I beg of you, get your tongue sorted out? You had a speech impediment. We wanted to thank you for taking the time to play Depression Quest. We realize it may not be the most enjoyable game you've ever played, or even the easiest, however we sincerely appreciate your involvement. Like Depression itself, Depression Quest does not have an end, really. There is no neat resolution to depression, and it was important to us that Depression Quest's own resolution reflect that. Instead of a tidy ending, we wanted to provide a series of outlooks to take moving forward. After all, that's all that we can really hope to do with depression, just keep moving forward, and at the end of the day, it's our outlook and our support from people just like you that makes all the difference in the world. Thank you again. I know under normal circumstances I would do a sort of a 5-minute bit at the end of these more sober things that I do from time to time that we've done in the past on various different topics. However, I feel this game has put everything that I could have said into better words than I can hope to, so I will simply say that these people have done something very special and very important here. I hope they're proud of what they've made, because they have made something good. I hope that as this game said at the beginning, it served some sort of a purpose for you. That's the reason that I'm making this video, I suppose. I hope it's been of some benefit in whichever situation or stage that you're in. I hope it's been of some benefit to you. I hope it's been of some purpose. I hope that you're okay. I hope that you will listen to the advice that I always give at the end of these videos. So look after each other, and good night.